What's going on, guys? Andrew of New Art Gaming back here, and today we're going to be talking about some Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains episode 83. Now, this started off very much like it was going to, unfortunately, be another recap episode. We start with our good old friends, Bird and Toad. But they end up actually turning it into partially a recap episode. We hit upon a lot of the major points from the last 25 or so episodes. Anything ranging from, like, the duel between Revolver and Windy, to Playmaker's duel against Bowman, to, you know, Blood Shepherd nearly being recruited by Revolver and then eventually losing to Lightning. All of those major key points, but they don't spend a ton of time on them, and they do introduce some new plot elements. We get some interesting discussions and speeches from the characters. So on the whole, like, just briefly summing up how I feel about it in terms of being a quote-unquote recap episode, this is by far the best one so far in my opinion, and probably one of the better recap episodes in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Most of the time it's just a lot of recycled scenes with about 1 to 2 minutes of new footage in total, kind of just transitioning that. Versus here, this was at least 70% new footage from what I could tell, so on the whole I'd say they did a pretty solid job here. Now, going back to the whole opening bird and frog scene, this was actually one of the more humorous introductions we've had from them. We find that they're a little bit down on their luck, having taken their bonuses in advance after getting a big score with their stories about Playmaker earlier in the show, right? And after all, they captured footage nobody else could, and Playmaker is still very much idolized within Vrains. He's somebody who can easily sell a story. But they haven't really been able to find him since then, and as a result, they find themselves following around Brave Max. After all, he does claim he's Playmaker's soulmate. If you just stick with me, I'm sure he'll come for me again, because after all, Playmaker saved him once, and he's a raving fanboy, so he believes that in his head. Whatever makes you happy, Brave Max. And this essentially leads them to getting 80 or fewer views per video versus the several million they got when they managed to record Playmaker, and they're basically in a situation where they may end up bankrupt. So this has kind of got them screwed. We get a lot of blunt tail-end jokes towards Brave Max. All in all, decently humorous for what they were going for here. As long as they don't use this humor excessively, I do think it kind of works. I feel like Brave Max is a relatively well-designed character in terms of his humor, though I do feel kind of bad for the guy. He seems somewhat oblivious as to his actual status with things. But once more, as long as he's happy, I guess that's all that counts, right? So moving forward from there, we actually do get a lot of nice scenes in this. There's a whole little isolated, you know, leaning over the rails, looking out into the ocean type of scene between Yusaku and Soulburner, whose name I always blank on in real life. But this reminds me of a lot of when we used to have Yusei and Jack and Crow kind of stare out into the city. Kind of similar to the scene that Bonds Beyond Time starts off with, where they're just sort of talking about what's happened, where they want to go with the future, and what's going to come of things. Couple key plot points here. Playmaker really emphasizes the idea that after this battle with Lightning, he believes that the Ignises, you know, such as Flame, Eye, and Aqua, who have been good and fought alongside the humans, need to go and hide themselves somewhere that the humans can never find them. He believes that they are going to be a danger. Now, this is interesting, considering that this plot and story arc that we've been building towards for a while, this clash between the Ignises and Lightning, seems like it's probably going to come to a head and conclude within the next 15 episodes or so. And normally, Yu-Gi-Oh! Shows run about 150 episodes, and I don't necessarily think this is going to vary too far from that. So that being the case, I'm really wondering if after, you know, the second arc, the second season of Vrains, if we're going to see some kind of a time skip to where humans make those AIs that Yusaku was starting to talk about, where they make a second wave of Ignises or something, and things do really start to go awry, and maybe they need to seek out the help of these Ignises. Almost sort of like the way Yugi needed to seek out Atem's help in the new Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie that came out, Dark Side of Dimensions, last year. Only, you know, having the AI stick around much longer. They basically dig them out, they're like, hey, we need your help for this conflict or whatever, and then they continue to press forward from there. I could see that definitely unfolding, and I wouldn't mind seeing a time skip. Once more, this show, in its subtleties, maintains a lot of the same vibes as 5Ds, which did have a lot of time skips in it, so to see something like that could be really cool. I think it would also add something to the show to see where the characters develop, how they move forward from here. Another big point of the speech that, once more, kind of connects it to 5Ds is Yusaku's talking a lot about needing to reclaim their future, how you make the future, and like where they're heading from here. That was kind of Yusei's obsession throughout the entire show, is protecting the future, what potential the future holds. Where you are now doesn't matter, it's a matter of who you could be down the line. That was kind of his whole point whenever he would preach to people about Satellite, and I'd say preaching, and like he would give these good speeches to them about how, hey, you judge me, but where I am doesn't determine who I am, it's what I'm going to do. once more, points about the future. So I thought those were some nice little speeches. It hits a lot of the main themes in Yu-Gi-Oh! And does so pretty well. I don't mind these little slice of life clips, and I think it manages to bring us down from a lot of dueling and throw us back into the characters for a bit, which, once more, I very much enjoy. A lot of the reason I watch Yu-Gi-Oh! Is because of the characters. So when we get clips like this, I think it's great, especially when they're well handled. This was 2 to 3 minutes of, just Yusaku and Soulburner hashing it out, talking about things. We got a little bit on Ignis and Flame. We showed that there's definitely a bond between them. Ignis and Flame didn't exactly seem happy about the fact that they would likely have to leave them, and Yusaku mentions them even making a new space, which is kind of a sad thought. It kind of hits home to see these characters we've grown close to in the Ignises probably have to leave soon. And this is almost kind of a reminder of how far we've come with Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains itself. It's funny to think that we're more than halfway done the show, most likely, unless it's longer than the usual Yu-Gi-Oh! Show, which we haven't had one go that far since GX, so very unlikely there. But overall, I'd say this was a very good scene. And this is immediately followed by them going to meet up with a meeting with Revolver. And going back to the whole frog and bird thing, there is kind of a funny scene here that I'm not sure if it was meant to be a reference or not, but in order for them to catch up to Yusaku and Soulburner on their D-boards, the frog ends up whipping out this little device that kind of transforms into a rocket, and he says, "Come on!" in like this sort of shout type of thing. It reminds me of the final smash that Captain Falcon uses in Super Smash Bros. Brawl when his phrase is, "Come on, Blue Falcon!" type of thing. Just because then he takes off on a really fast vehicle. And F-Zero, where Captain Falcon's from, very fast-paced racing game. Don't necessarily know if that was meant to be a reference, but that's immediately where my mind went, and going with those characters and their humor, I could see them maybe hinting at that, because it's just vague enough that it definitely wouldn't be any copyright breach, right? So moving on to this little meeting with Revolver, it's funny, because we have Ghost Girl, Soulburner, Playmaker, and Blue Angel there. Not Blue Angel, Blue Maiden. I need to make sure I'm keeping her name straight, because we've had Aoi change names as her form has developed more in the show a couple of times. But in terms of this, basically, we see our main 4 characters kind of questioning whether they should even trust Revolver. After all, he was alongside the Knights of Hanoi. He gave them these programs to put in their dual discs to shield them from lightning, and what's to say he wasn't secretly sabotaging them or planting something in there he could then use to control them? After all, they are questioning Revolver, why'd you gather us here to help? Or gather us here to talk, I should say. And he says, it's the only way I could get you to help. That, to me, almost strikes as a little bit threatening of, hey, I planted these things in your dual discs, so now I can control you. Maybe if they go away from the direction he wanted them to head, he shuts down the dual discs entirely, or he threatens to kill the AIs. After all, they are kind of existing within the dual discs right now, or something very suspicious in terms of that. Now, Aqua does end up reading Revolver, and we find out that he seems to be genuine, so as long as Aqua's accurate, which so far she seems to be relatively accurate when it comes to judging people in Ignises, then he's probably fine, but I could see how it could be interpreted that way. So pretty good and consistent writing on the writer's parts, and keeping vague enough interpretations for Revolver's dialogue, writing in a way that could be interpreted a few different ways, and also managing to keep consistent with his character. So I like the way that plays out. And this episode more or less wraps up in kind of a neat way. We see some tension unravel between Revolver and Soulburner here. I thought it was well written because Soulburner essentially blames Revolver for the fact that his parents died in a car accident. They went looking for him because he was tied into the Lost incident. Now, in reality, is that really Revolver's fault? Well, some people have a tendency to carry over blame to people who come in the generation after the person they really should be blaming. Say, if I was angry with someone's parents or their aunt or uncle, but the aunt or uncle is now gone, maybe I carry the blame down to their sons and daughters, right? Or something like that. And that's basically what Soulburner's doing here. I mean, Revolver, we get the impression, is roughly Playmaker's age, maybe a year or two older. And he's also the same age as Soulburner. So with that being the case, I highly doubt a 12-year-old would really be in the... Or I'm sorry, not 12. I highly doubt a kid, is what I should be saying, would be in the position where he's actually kidnapping these children and doing anything to sabotage them. His father, maybe, but Revolver's already shown on a few occasions that while he does agree with his father's overall objectives to destroy the Ignises, his way of going about them doesn't necessarily stay the same. After all, he seemed to be talking to Playmaker a lot more than his father necessarily would have. He seems to be opening up to Playmaker a lot more, and he seems to be generating a little bit of an open mind at least. I mean, after all, he's working alongside the Ignises he sought to destroy in order to stop lightning, right? Now, some could say that's just a strategic move, but I do genuinely believe Revolver's got a little bit more of a soft side to him, and he does wholeheartedly believe that the Lost incident was a mistake, as did his father afterwards. So some of that blame from Soulburner, while I understand his emotionally fueled rage, I mean, his parents died who cared about him and essentially left him in a life where he couldn't necessarily fully adapt after experiencing something as traumatizing as the Lost incident in and of itself. So his life was literally torn apart as a result of what happened that was caused by Revolver's father, but at the same time, Revolver isn't his father, and even Revolver's father and himself are very regretful of what was done during that incident. They don't like what came as a result of it. So with that being the case, whether blame should be placed there or not is somewhat debatable, but we do have a duel that's coming up, and I think the dialogue and interaction between these two is what I'm looking forward to the most, because we're just going to watch a lot of things probably come out about Soulburner's past, where he developed after the Lost incident and everything else. We may even see Revolver show a little bit of that remorseful side that I think is starting to show underneath his skin here, that I think he's starting to develop a little bit of a softer side. Maybe some of that will come out towards Soulburner. The relationship definitely doesn't seem to be like, say, Kaiba and Joey, where Revolver is purely looking down upon Soulburner. So I'm going to be very curious to see how their dialogue ends up going. I do think it's going to be an interesting duel to watch unfold, and one thing I like about this one, I mentioned this in a couple of my episode reviews, is this is one that could theoretically go either way. After all, we do have two very strong duelists at play here, with a decent number of wins under their belt, and it doesn't involve a main antagonist or a main protagonist, so that's one exciting thing, although I don't know how much it really moves our overall plot forward either, but I guess it is something that should probably be addressed as a result of Soulburner's past. So on the whole, I think this was a pretty decent setup episode, guys. I thought it was pretty good for being a recap episode, but not great on the whole. I do think it takes a step down from the rest of our episodes if we're analyzing it as a whole, but if we're analyzing character interactions, I actually think this is a few steps up. I enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh! The most when it takes a step back from the action after having some decent action to kind of fill in the gaps and show how the characters respond to things and how they genuinely feel, and I think that's what this episode did pretty well. So as usual, guys, be sure to let me know your thoughts and comments in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. If not, constructive criticism is always welcome, and I'll catch you guys next time with some more Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains content.